Welcome to the program, Haviv Rettig Gur.
Hi, Jonathan. Thanks for having me.
All right. I'm assuming I can ask you anything because that's how you advertise. So let me start.
That's just the brand. Let's not get carried away.
Okay, fine. All right. Let's start with your assessment of Israel's options in Gaza. I mean, this is the debate right now. So let me ask you to weigh in. Are there good options for Israel right now? What can Israel do? What should Israel do in Gaza?
Israel finds itself facing a real conundrum, and we've known about this conundrum for months, and it's the same exact problem. In the end, all Hamas has to do is hold out. Hamas has much higher level of acceptance of Palestinian civilian deaths, Palestinian damage in Gaza. Hamas is able to watch, willing to watch Gaza starve in a way that the Israelis simply can't. And the Israelis have gone from strategy to strategy, trying to root out tunnels, trying to create massive military pressure in order to reach deals for the release of hostages. Those deals were struck on occasion, but they always fell apart when you reach the second stage, the second round of letting out hostages. And then Hamas would always demand the same thing, which is an end to the war and Hamas reclaiming Gaza. And the Israelis always balked at that. In other words, this war can end in any way except Hamas retaking Gaza. That is not an option. And as time went on, and it was clear that Hamas could just sit around forever. It can't rule Gaza right now, but it can disrupt anyone else ruling Gaza. In other words, Gaza as it is right now is a place where the Saudis can't come in and bring order and rebuild. It's a place where the Arab world, the Americans, you're not going to send people in. You have, by the way, American contractors dead in the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation aid distribution centers from Hamas attacks on those centers just in the last 3 months. And so it is not a place where, if Hamas remains, Gaza can't be rebuilt. At the same time, the Israelis don't know how to get Hamas out. And Hamas is essentially able to hold not just Israeli hostages, but all of Gaza hostage. Israel, I thought, and I've written this and said this repeatedly for the first time in May, had made a understandable strategic decision based in the fact that it was stuck in this problem, in this paradox, in this Gordian knot. But it turned out to be catastrophic, and it could not have not ended catastrophically, which was they saw the growing protests against Hamas, and they said, we can drive those protests. We can turn those protests into a massive uprising against Hamas if we clarify that Hamas is really causing Gaza, to arrive at a dead end. And so they decided to limit aid. Now, the Israelis are absolutely convinced that they had calculated how much aid was in Gaza, and they were leaving a 3-4 month buffer between actual hunger setting in. And the reason is, basically, if you go to UN numbers, something like 100,000 tons went in January during the ceasefire, 200,000 tons went in February. The UN data itself tells us that you need about 60,000 tons a month. And so there was this huge extra amount of aid that had gone into Gaza when the Israelis, when the ceasefire fell apart in March, said nothing goes in anymore, as a way to create that internal pressure. It turns out that Hamas was hoarding massive amounts of aid. It turns out that criminal organizations were hoarding massive amounts of aid. It also turns out that many, many ordinary Gazans were hoarding massive amounts of aid, which is an incredibly reasonable response to the possibility of food scarcity. And so if some are hoarding, others don't have, and the Israeli calculations were totally off and unbelievably stupid. And there's a deeper frustrating mistake here on the Israeli part, on the side of the Israelis, which was, and all of this, by the way, is separate from, just the whirlwind of pressure and anger and bitterness and accusations against Israel. This is just internal Israeli debate that has now, everything I'm telling you has now been reported in all the major Israeli media in Hebrew. Essentially, the IDF intelligence appears to have believed that it could play chicken with Hamas on the question of Gazans not having food. I don't know what to say about that. It's like Israeli intelligence forgot who and what Hamas are.
Yeah,
the Israelis.
I've seen that, and I got to say, that I think was the biggest mistake here, right? Because Hamas, they've long understood that all they need to do is not lose, right? And they don't care whether the people of Gaza suffer as a result of this. We've seen this now in 5 rounds of fighting over the last, decade and a half or so, where they just don't care what happens to the people, that they just want to emerge unscathed. And so you try to play chicken with a group like that, their calculus is just not sane. It's just not the way that normal people think about human lives. And they don't care about the population that they purport to control. That's what makes Gaza so different from just about any other population on the planet, is that the people that rule Gaza simply don't care about the people. But let me ask you—
it was more than that, though. Just let me add one thing. Hamas says more than that. Gazan suffering is the path to victory. This is the sacrifice that will bring victory. And they said openly, if Gazans start dying of starvation en masse, then Britain will recognize a Palestinian state, and France will, and Portugal will, and everything will change. And the Israelis will fall, and there'll be sanctions, and boycott will finally be able to defeat them because they'll finally be weakened. Gazan suffering is the strategy. And so, again, just as an Israeli talking about my own government, so you asked about whether there are options. First of all, not that option. That's not an option. Massively flood Gaza with aid until it's worthless and Hamas can't use it on the black market to finance its campaigns, and then find other military options. And those other military options, I think the one thing that Israel has over Gaza and Hamas has no answer for, and it's not food, it's rebuilding. You only have to say there's no rebuilding, and we can wait it out for 20 years. And President Trump appears to be trying to pull Israel out of this stupid, dark place into which bad strategy has taken it, when he said earlier today, last night, I don't remember exactly how the time zones work, but recently, I think earlier today, Israel time, where he said, if Hamas is gone, America will come in and lead a massive rebuilding. Mm-hmm. Now, that is a huge thing to offer. It's also conditioned on Hamas leaving, unlike the British recognition. So there could be a path out, and President Trump is showing the way where the Israelis have failed.
Yeah, and I've written about it, and now others have too. I think withholding all reconstruction and letting Hamas know that they need to leave in order for reconstruction to begin is not actually a message for Hamas. It's a message for the Gaza people. It's a message for the region, and I think that's how pressure can and probably will build. But let's talk about these calls for reoccupying Gaza. We heard Bibi talk about this. I tend to think it's pretty idiotic. Is this really what Bibi wants? I mean, I tend to think he's bluffing, but I know that some of the ministers in his cabinet are deadly serious about this. So what's the center of gravity in Israel about a complete reoccupation of a place that really nobody wants?
We have a poll in a right-wing newspaper that says a majority of Israelis support it, and we have a poll in a left-wing think tank that says that the vast majority of Israelis oppose it. It very much depends on how you ask the question, which means that there are two things happening simultaneously in the Israeli psyche right now on this question, and they are reflected in the two different positions in the cabinet. You have Israelis who are just feel themselves inside this problem, this conundrum, this paradox. What do you do with Gaza? This didn't work, that didn't work, nothing works, because Hamas has the one huge advantage of being willing to watch the whole thing burn to the ground. There are 57,000 tunnel shafts leading to 500 kilometers of tunnels under Gaza cities. And Gaza is not a big place. It's everywhere, the tunnel system. It is the biggest thing Palestinians have ever built. It's an astonishing accomplishment. And demolishing it, and demolishing where it could be, and demolishing the IEDs that were prepared, because every time the IDF was going to go into a place, it had to announce it so that it wouldn't kill too many civilians. All of that turned Gaza into rubble. Now, you can think that's too far. The Israelis went too far. I'm not debating that. I'm just saying there was no way to get Hamas out without turning those areas into rubble. There are many areas still standing in Gaza. They're going to turn into rubble if we're talking about now moving in and defeating Hamas, destroying those last parts of those tunnel infrastructures, and then instituting an occupation. Now, an occupation has tremendous bad costs, tremendous ones for Israel, for Palestinians also, obviously, but for Israel. One, you have full responsibility. The responsibility of belligerent occupation to take care of the civilian population, which is the Fourth Geneva Convention, is also Israeli law. Israel's a signatory. In other words, there is no way for Israel to get out of that. It will have full responsibility for food. It'll have full responsibility for rebuilding. It'll have responsibility for electricity, for sanitation. It's a terrible idea, and it's a long-term idea. And there's no way to succeed in it. This Israeli government is not going to rebuild Gaza or build enough just to have the infrastructures to feed and take care of it? Really? Why would they take
Not
that
one
on if they're not
shekel. I mean,
themselves
honestly, I mean, no Israeli is going to want to spend money on the
Right.
infrastructure of the Gaza Strip. I mean, that to me is
Right.
abundantly clear, especially after the economic damage that Israel has absorbed over the course of this 1.5-year war.
Right. The only so there are two camps. One camp thinks that, as you say, this is Israel telling Hamas, this is it. Like, now we're really going to come for you. If I was Hamas, I've just heard that from the Israelis 4 or 5 times. Each time they destroy more of Gaza, and each time the international campaign against Israel gets worse for Israel. And again, I'm Hamas. I don't give a shit how many Palestinians die. Forgive my French. The other camp in the cabinet,
the word is married.
The other camp in the cabinet are the people who want something completely different, and they're having a completely different conversation, which is, let's take Gaza so that we can rebuild Israeli settlements in Gaza and claim Gaza.
Right.
And that is, now I am convinced that is not Bibi.
No, that's Smotrich. It's Ben Gvir. It's
Smotrich and Ben Gvir. Bibi's not there. But Bibi is also not talking. And, you know, a lot of people around the world are not convinced. Now, I think it's because I know more about him, but I don't have the data to show them that it's not what he's going to do. So he definitely doesn't want to take on occupation, even though he says he does. Yeah. Parts of his coalition he depends on for his coalition to survive want to build settlements. It's all very confusing. And it's, again, another strategic whirlwind that's going to come down on Israel, that Israel's planning very poorly. The IDF chief of staff publicly doesn't want to do this. He doesn't know how you get out of it.
And I think that is a fascinating debate right now. Eyal Zamir coming out and publicly opposing this. He's supposed to be the Bibi guy, right? I mean, that's why he was named as chief of staff. He had a shakeup at the top at the Ministry of Defense, and now we've got this. But let me ask you something else. I mean, we talk about the isolation that Israel's feeling right now. I want to ask you about these calls for a Palestinian state from parts of the international community. I mean, look, I understand that Israel doesn't want to have a Palestinian state declared. It would be essentially the creation of another failed state in a region full of basket case failed states. And that's the last thing that Israel wants. But let me ask you, how much damage does this actually do to Israel? I mean, there is the declaration of the state itself, which I think is a strategic mistake, and it's redrawing the map in ways that I think don't portend stability. But how much isolation does this directly cause for Israel?
I don't know. I live in Israel. I don't live in the rest of the world. You might actually have a better sense of that than me. I suspect that a policy that is deeply misguided. There was a strategic theory, but it was catastrophically mistaken and led to hunger in Gaza, did terrible, horrific things among Israel's best friends in the world. And Britain recognizing will not do much. And by the way, Israel has a great argument here, an argument that is, I think, has even made the British government itself start to walk back a little bit what it meant by recognition, which is just reasserting its support for 2 states is apparently what they're actually going to do in September now, which is not a recognition. They'll call it recognition, but it's not what it means. But the point is, it's not that they're giving Palestinians a state, it's that they're handing Hamas the great gift of a state. And in doing so, they wrecked any possibility of hostage talks. I mean, Keir Starmer really did it about as stupidly as you can do it on this earth. I mean, it's really, truly unimaginable, the stupidity of the British government. Again, forgive my French, but he literally said, if there's no ceasefire in place by September at the General Assembly, I will recognize a Palestinian state. He literally told Hamas, all you got to do is hold out, hold on to those Israeli hostages, let them languish in those dungeons, keep Gazans suffering, not surrender, not give in, not even go to a ceasefire. And for that refusal, because he can't even imagine Hamas agency, he can only imagine Israeli agency. Right. And so he literally incentivized Hamas to leave us all.
And that's exactly what Gideon Sa'ar said at the UN. And I think that was actually a powerful statement from a guy that's not necessarily known for his oratory skills.
And every British diplomat secretly agrees with that.
I think so too. I think it's also interesting. We had Michael Oren on the program a couple of days ago, and what he said was that this is like the one big bet that Yahya Sinwar that he made, and that it's paid off, right? I mean, it has hit the jackpot because, look, his bet on the Iranian axis and the destruction of Israel didn't work, but his bet on the international community rallying behind Hamas at the end of the day, it actually has paid off to some extent or another. But let me ask you something else, just totally separate. You and I have talked in the past about Israeli resilience, and I'm just curious what you think about, as this international opinion sours on Israel, as Israel finds itself, at least diplomatically right now, increasingly isolated. You've got these calls for a Palestinian state. You've got some of these weird protests in places like Greece, which are typically pro-Israel at the end of the day. You get a sense right now that Israel feels more and more isolated. How is the Israeli public handling all of this right now?
We have a poll that says that asked Israelis, I believe by the Israel Democracy Institute, a think tank in Jerusalem, that asked Israelis, do you think the Israeli army is doing what it can to alleviate civilian suffering in Gaza? And the huge majority of Israelis said yes. Israeli Jews, Israeli Arabs, majority say no. Israeli Jews, majority say yes. And they really do believe that this war is mismanaged. Most Israelis want the war to end because they don't trust how this government has run it and believe it has been mismanaged and failed to achieve its goals. So most Israelis in polls say the war should end now. But that's an expression of distrust at the government. It's not an expression of agreement with the world that the war is somehow uniquely evil in the annals of warfare. They genuinely think that Hamas, at the end of the day, will come for them, that anywhere they pull out of, Hamas will take over. Hamas wins polls in the West Bank right now. If Israel pulls out, that's a Gaza 16 times bigger. They genuinely think that the world is ignoring, possibly for anti-Semitism, possibly because of a propaganda war, Israel isn't even engaged in. It hasn't even shown up to the fight. Prime Minister Netanyahu literally doesn't have an English language spokesman. The Israelis genuinely believe that the world is ignoring the fact that the Palestinians are not led by a Mandela and not led by a Gandhi and not led by a king, that they are even the Algerian FLN, who brutalized and terrorized the French for years and massacred civilians, never demanded the right to destroy France. And so the Palestinian resistance in that sense is just absolutely in intent and purpose genocidal. The only thing lacking is capability. And Hamas says it openly, and everyone forgives it. And so that Israelis are immunized to international moral emotions by Hamas. Someday the Palestinian support, the pro-Palestinian movement in the West, will notice that every demand it makes of Israelis to withdraw, Hamas tells Israelis in their other ear, anywhere you withdraw from, we're going to murder your children from that place. They will notice that Palestinian politics are actually neutralizing their own attempts to do things for Palestinians. The day they notice that will be a very good day for the Palestinian cause, because it'll stop neutralizing itself. Until that day, Israelis genuinely don't think they have 1,000 other options here.
Yeah, I do get a sense that the Israelis understand the stakes of this war. And I think the October 7th attack was a wake-up call. The subsequent multi-front war was yet another wake-up call. The war with Iran was another wake-up call. I get a sense that you're just looking at a country that is just absolutely resilient right now and defiant. And so while we wring our hands here in the United States or elsewhere around the world about Israel's public image, get the sense that the Israelis know what they're fighting for and have not wavered, even if they're not particularly trusting of their own government right now. I find that fascinating. There's a paradox in there that I think is just really interesting to unpack. We're going to leave it there. Oh, go ahead.
One thing, in Gaza, there's another interesting piece. Imagine for a moment being an Israeli and watching the tremendous devastation in Gaza. And there are many, many emotions and feelings. We have polls that say there's very little sympathy. It basically depends on whether Hamas recently talked to Israelis, and polls that say there's a lot of sympathy. But the very fact that Hamas will watch Gaza destroyed and watch the kind of war that Hamas built and demanded and drove and sparked on October 7th, in a way designed, engineered to bring that Israeli invasion, and still won't buckle. The very fact that nothing that happens to Gazans will ever make Hamas buckle means they're undeterrable. which means they can never be allowed to take over anything else, and Gaza can never really be free as long as Hamas is there. And so the Israelis are made resilient both by Hamas's actual things they tell them they're going to do, but also by Hamas's resistance to any kind of immunity to any kind of Palestinian suffering. So again, you want to save Gaza, you want to help Gaza, there's nothing you'll ever do for Gaza that Hamas won't undo. And so it has to start with Hamas. And once Hamas is removed, come at the Israelis. Tell them, how dare you have this policy or that policy? It's no longer justified. Hamas is removed. The day the pro-Palestinian camp figures that out, they'll actually be useful to Palestinians.
All right. Now we're going to leave it there. I want to thank you, Haviv Rettig Gur of the Ask Haviv Anything podcast, for joining us today on the FDD Morning Brief.
Thanks, Jonathan.